it is really the final frontier. And it's not that there aren't problems in film and TV and politics and everywhere, but sports is the last area where this community has had the fewest of breakthroughs. And I joke that the super boss is hockey. Hi, I'm Matt Lichtenstadter. That works too. See, it's funny how, because Brock and I know each other, I have to train myself to not assume this is a conversation that only we're in. Sorry.
Yeah, yes, but I'm Matt
Lichtenstadter, just a broadcaster and journalist that hasn't been doing a lot of either during the pandemic. But if you know me, I host a couple podcasts. One's called Why Hockey, general hockey podcast, and the other is the Outfield podcast, which is about out people in sports. And Brock was on Why Hockey before I started Outfield, and we've been talking really when I came out. Was it August 2018? I saw one of his some piece about him right before that, and we've been talking ever since, and we've become pretty good friends.
Yeah, and it's homophobic that you haven't had me on your gay podcast.
Well, I will say that my philosophy is I don't interview friends.
I'm just teasing you. I've been on many a podcast, and I've done your other one. I'm just bugging you.
You have, yeah.
So listen, how did you get into hockey?
I just picked it up, I think, at one point when I was thinking
about off the ground. You saw it and said, "There's hockey."
Yeah, there's hockey. No, my dad was a huge hockey fan, big Rangers fan, and he took me to some hockey games when I was younger, but I didn't much like it. Too loud, too noisy at the games, and I just picked it up again after a while. I focused on American football more than anything else. And then I just sort of gradually got into more sports, and then I got into hockey. And eventually it just sort of happened. There's no seminal moment really. And it's just become a sport where I met good people. I've interacted with good people. You make good friends, and it's a sport that it's just become a part of my life. And it's become a sport I've really enjoyed. And it's become a sport I've covered from my couch basically, but I don't mind covering it from my couch. It's a fun sport to cover. And I mean, for all of its issues, I mean, now that I'm here, the drive is to make it better. The drive is to make it a sport that more people feel comfortable with, because when you get through all the nonsense, I mean, it's a beautiful sport. It's so much fun. It's so entertaining. These are incredible athletes, and we don't need these barriers making it so people can't watch this and they don't have the ability to enjoy, or they're told at the door, go away.
So that leads me into my next question. What do you love about the sport?
I love the idea that these amazing athletes also have to do this other thing that is incredibly difficult. Like, I cannot skate for the life of me, and I probably never will. But these are amazing athletes who are going 25 miles an hour, doing incredible things with dangerous weapons on their feet.
I love that.
It's incredible. Like, you can watch all these other sports. I'm watching the Euros right now. These amazing athletes can do, again, incredible things. But in hockey, you're skating and you're doing this at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's so fast. It's so much fun. And again, I think a lot of it is sometimes, you meet good people. I don't meet you if I don't watch hockey, and every sport has its flaws. Every sport has its positives. But for me, it's the hockey community. While it's smaller, you get to meet a lot of amazing people. And when you meet those amazing people, you hear great stories. And as a trained journalist and broadcaster, you're looking for stories. And stories are fun if you get the great stories. And in hockey, there are a lot of good stories that we're just not telling, and we need to tell them.
How could hockey be better for you, for Matt, for as a queer identifying person?
For me, I think that this sport, in many ways, or at least at the NHL level, they want to do better, but they don't know how to do better. And to me, it frustrates me that we see sometimes good intentions, but, and I say this in the nicest way possible, they're clueless. You and I have talked about things in different contexts with much more colorful language. But for me, I think that this sport needs to, I don't want to say put its money where its mouth is, but I think it needs the drive of people who are willing to make it uncomfortable, to think in another direction, because this sport can only grow if it expands the big tent. And other sports have found a way to be a big tent sport. And that's what this sport needs to be. And I think this sport needs to embrace some of the lighter side of its own culture. I mean, you and I joke all the time about how things in this sport can be unintentionally extremely gay.
Hmm.
Embrace it, make fun of it. There's nothing embarrassing about it. Life is unintentionally gay quite a lot. But this sport needs to, I think, lean into it a little more, but also put people in positions that are going to be able to push it from the inside out. Because the outside in, it's clearly not working the way we'd like it to. And there are people inside the sport that want it to be better. But I think this sport needs to, in the concept of capital H hockey, give up a little of that control. I hope it does.
Yeah, I hope so too, because I think you're right. I think it, they could lean into some fun, and it's taking outsiders or non-traditional hockey folk to create their own community outside of the traditional community to make it safe and inclusive and fun, and those areas are growing, but it's got to grow on the inside too.
See, I want the NHL and I want these hockey organizations to not have to be brought to this point because it's being forced upon them. And my biggest fear, as somebody who likes to talk to people, to tell their stories about what it means to be out in sports, and who have talked to a number of people in hockey about it, my biggest fear is that the day when it happens, that we have a major person in this sport come out, that they're not prepared for it and it goes horribly wrong. And that's
Mhm.
my biggest fear, because you get one chance at this. And if it goes wrong, it could set this back decades. But if
Well,
you get it right, then the NHL and all of these hockey organizations, for all of the problems that they've had, they could get some praise and be able to look and say, we can do this. But my biggest fear is that it's not that they're not willing, it's just that they're not willing to do what it is necessary to lay the groundwork so when it happens, because it's going to at some point. We have talked a lot about how the generations younger than us are identifying queer, whatever that might be, at incredibly high rates.
mhm.
So the idea that there are no gay players or bisexual players or whatever in men's hockey we're focusing on right now, that's obviously absurd. We know they're there. But what happens when they're ready? Is hockey ready? Are the teams ready?
And
We need to make sure that they are. And I hope that these organizations are ready to listen, because the day that it happens can be a really important day, but they need to be ready when it happens.
and I think we can look at other examples where hockey hasn't necessarily been ready yet. Like you look at Yannick Duplessis and how like he went and had to do all this media stuff really on his own, and there was no preparation or support there from hockey necessarily behind the scenes to like get him ready for that.
We were talking a little bit just on our own about, and we've both talked to him, and obviously he's an amazing kid who's done something incredibly courageous, and he was what, 17 when it happened?
Hmm.
We were talking a little, like, we were worried at a point, like this could have gone south, and it didn't. And we're very thankful for that. And all the coming out stories in hockey have been great, but it hasn't been anything to the level of what you would see if it was somebody, I mean, forget the NHL, talk AHL, ECHL, or somebody in Canadian junior hockey. And
Hmm.
we again, there are players in the closet in Canadian junior hockey. That's just math. We all know that.
Hmm.
What about a player who's going into their draft year? How do they deal with that with these NHL teams? And I know it's probably better than what it was. There are some good front offices in this league that are willing to, again, they wouldn't care about this, but then you also have the 200 hockey men. And again, I want to make sure that when it happens, that we've laid the groundwork so that it can be done successfully, because I've seen what happens when it can go well. And I think about, for me, Colin Martin, when he came out 3 years ago, and how big of a deal that was for me, and how well that went down, and how that process was so smooth, and everyone was involved, and they did it the right way. And when these big coming out stories, and it's not just about coming out, but I think about it in that terms because it's the next moment in this journey, particularly in this sport.
Hmm.
If the groundwork is laid ahead of time, and everybody's on the same page, and everybody's prepared for what might happen, then there's no telling what good can come of it. And if it's executed the right way, you've opened up the door for a lot of other people to follow.
Without a doubt, but I think that also comes like beyond just being prepared for the media and whatnot, humanizing, educating, shifting culture, shifting language in locker rooms, doing all the work, the tangible work that needs to be done within the culture that hasn't fully been done yet.
Well, and I think I know you, and I know what you do on a daily basis, but it also takes people who are well-meaning, but just haven't had the ability to act on that. You obviously have done a lot of work with Curtis Gabriel, who is, taken on the mantle that, I'm going to do this and it shouldn't be on his own. And we know other good people in the sport that actually want to make it better. And they just need the guidance and they need the structures to help them do. And that's why I keep saying the groundwork is being done by smart people. And I always talk to you about it. You shouldn't have to do this on your own. And you've done a lot of it on your own. But my hope is that with some of the things we're seeing, and this is coming just naturally and also in some ways by force, because it's not like these organizations and these entities are going to do it on their own. What some of these people are doing is great, and it's happening organically. And I hope there's more of them that are willing to do this so that not just for the greater bit of the sport, but also for the greater bit of you. I know you too well. This poor guy is doing all these interviews and they're great. He's doing all this work because he was there. He's the guy who can say, I was in those dressing rooms. I've been in hockey. And one person cannot change the sport overnight. And if I can play a little role from my couch somewhere, then I'm happy to do that.
Well, and I think for me that was part of the reason for this series and trying to amplify voices and celebrate queer folks in the game so that other people who may follow me on socials and whatnot and traditional hockey folk who do can see that like there's a lot of us. And
there are more people, as I said, and that's just on the outside. And we know that there are more people on the inside than we know of as of right now. And the goal that I have, and every time I do those interviews, is to tell these stories. And I get sometimes people who are telling me my story isn't interesting. I say every story is interesting.
Every single one.
Well, and that's just me interviewing people, who are out, whether they be a journalist, whether they be an athlete of, again, minor repute or whatever. Every story is important because every story adds to a general collage of people who can be not just out in this sport, but all sports, because sports, I've always said, are the final frontier for this community. And you learn about the history of our community. It is really the final frontier. And it's not that there aren't problems in film and TV and politics and everywhere, but sports is the last area where this community has had the fewest of breakthroughs. And I joke that the super boss is hockey.
Yeah, it's there hasn't been a lot of traction. So knowing there hasn't been a lot of traction and knowing how it is, what keeps you here? What keeps you in hockey?
The people I've met, because the people I've met are worth keeping in touch with and worth this common bond over. Also, when you follow a team, sports fandom is highly irrational. It makes no sense. No rational person would ever be a sports fan. No rational person would root for the teams that I've rooted for my entire life.
There is no such thing as a rational sports fan, which is why I troll all the hockey teams on
Well,
Twitter.
I mean, I find it fun because, we enjoy that ribbing, that it's light-hearted, but it can take the steam out. It can take the edge out. But for me, a lot of it is there's great people in the sport that I'm not giving up on. And there are great people to follow in this sport that cover it and make it what it is for me and for other people. And also because I want to be there when somebody big comes out in hockey. And I want to say I played a small role in making that happen. I'm not important in any way, but I want to say that I helped play a little role and celebrate that moment. And I don't want to, to leave a sport that I know can be changed because it's not willing to change.
Right.
And I think that at every point, it will be willing to change. And maybe that is irrational. I know I make jokes about how hockey culture is terrible all the time, as somebody who's not in dressing rooms and barely covers it on his couch. But, you talk to enough people in it, and if you're still in it and you're still pushing, even though you have every reason to not do it because you've been put in terrible positions at sometimes by capital H hockey, then I've had much less of that. If you're still here, I should still be here. If you're still here, a lot of people should still be here. You have every reason to, for lack of a better term, flip the bird and leave, and sashay away. You have no reason to still be here, and yet you still are.
It's crossed my mind a few times.
Yes, it has, and we've talked about it. But
and
the fact that he's here is a testament to his own personal strength and his own drive to do something greater than himself. I think that we always talk in hockey about, giving yourself for the team, giving yourself for your group. And one of the comments I thought about when I've talked to you and I've talked to other people is, you've given so much to the game of hockey. So many of these people gave their lives for this sport, and the sport gave them nothing in return. So it's time to keep working so that these people who gave, like you and other people who you've talked to and other people who you're going to talk to, it's time for hockey to get back to them. And I want to stay in it. So for all these people that I've talked to and all these people who have these great stories and who have really done more in the sport than I ever will, I'm here to help them get their piece back. So this shouldn't be a take relationship. Hockey shouldn't just take, it should give.
So with that being said, what gives you hope for queer people within the sport?
I get to joke with Igor Larionov about what a twink is.
That's a good reason to be hopeful
for
the sport.
Igor Larionov the second. Maybe that's too inside the beltway, but the fact that I got to have a DM conversation with him explaining what a twink is gives me hope that maybe there are people who are well-minded in this sport who are actually willing to give it a try and are willing to push it. And I've never seen somebody so happy to put their pronouns in their bio. We've never seen that before. And it's a hockey player.
Yeah.
And you get the sense that he's doing it just because he thinks it's the right thing to do. And that's the son of one of the most famous players of all time.
Mm-hmm.
If he can do it, and if Curtis Gabriel, who could be cut from any team at any moment, and no offense, Curtis, I love you, but you're kind of replaceable as a hockey player. It's just the way it is.
Me.
I know you know
I
that.
disagree. He brings intangibles.
I'm not going to go into the intangibles and the 200 hockey men stuff, but right, like if these guys can do it, and if Brian Burke, who is the most prototypical hockey man in the world, can keep pushing and be a voice for good in this sport, then why can't the rest of us? And when I think about that, and I think about seeing what an active NHL player is saying and going to everyone who will listen, and when I hear, the son of Igor Larionov doing what he's doing, and you hear Brian Burke, who has a lot of sway in this game, no matter what you think of the way he constructs his teams. And if they're going to keep pushing and they're going to do it, then why can't we? And
it's a good reason for hope. It's a good reason for optimism.
Listen, life is full of reasons to not hope right now. We're still in a pandemic. Why can't you have a little irrational hope? I mean, if you follow the Florida Panthers like I do, every day is irrational hope that things are going to get better, and it almost never does. So,
yeah, even the Islanders are better.
Well, I mean, that was already well known, and Trocheck was still tripped. But anyway, no matter.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
All I will say is if you're out there and you're well-meaning, but you don't know what to do, just ask people in this sport. We'll give you a little helping hint to push you in the right direction. We don't want to tell you what you have to do because it's going to be hard. But if you're willing to listen and willing to admit, and it's the hardest thing to admit that I don't know, and it's very hard for somebody like me to admit that. I think it's very hard sometimes for anyone to admit that they don't know, and there's an area where they need to learn. And I don't want to say be educated because that sounds condescending, but if there's an area where you don't have answers or there's something in there that can help you and push you in another direction, a better direction that you haven't thought about. And of course, you never think about it. You know, there are a bunch of people in this sport I know that care, but just their brains are not wired to think a certain way that you have to in order to, I think, get to where we need to get to in the sport. We're wired because we see it every day, and these experiences are what they are. But I think sympathy is important, and understanding that there are going to be moments when you're talking with people like us, where you're never going to be able to empathize because you haven't gone through it. But as long as you're willing to sympathize and willing to say, yes, how can I help? Then you can do so much good. And don't shy away from it, because the only way this sport's going to get better is if it takes some uncomfortable risks. And I hope people in the sport are willing to take some uncomfortable risks.
Same.
It's more beyond time to do that.
Completely agree. That was a great way to end it, Matt. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was awesome.
It's fun to talk with you, even now on video.